I appreciate the opportunity to share some ideas about the Adventist Church and the metrics. For those of you who don't know me, this is what I look like wearing white socks. Every 56 days, I donate blood, and the needle always hurts, but they really like my blood, so I do this. Some assumptions and stipulations. We wouldn't be having this discussion if we didn't think the Adventist Church is still important. And its early history is important because many members and many leaders still value that historic paradigm and culture. And their image of Adventism is often nostalgic, bordering on myth. And the reality today is often quite different. This is a common way of expressing membership, world membership growth, just charting the raw data, and it tends to have a somewhat of an exponential shape, but not quite. But there's a strange reality going on. And if we look at the growth rate, the annualized growth rate worldwide, and even where I don't have annual data points, I've annualized the 5-year average there. But the trend is definitely down. And it is more severely down in the North American division. In fact, the growth rate has been negative for the past 2 years. And this is not a chart you will see in the Adventist Review. So, and many North American division conferences are already shrinking. The current growth rate, 1-year growth rate, is minus 0.54. And so I'm going to have to move something here. Oh, in the Southern California Conference. And this is a non-zero base chart. So I'm ethically obligated to put that little circle around, calling the attention to the non-zero base of the chart. But the trend in Southern California, particularly the Los Angeles area, is downward. The baptism rate, the number of baptisms per 100 members, is also going steadily down since 1970. So what are the causes of this decline? And what I'm going to do is to use an engineering technique called root cause analysis. And what I'm also seeing is engagement decline, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And of course, decline in Adventist school enrollment. Several factors. For each individual, the factors may differ, but there's a loss of doctrinal credibility, particularly the hostility to science, the reliance on an inerrant Ellen White, some ambiguous soteriology, and the 170-year delay in the second coming. Some young people are turned off from the church because of its social policy, the treatment of women, and discomforting minorities. There is also a decline or a loss in sense of community, particularly at the conference level. Congregations still have a sense of community because they have eye contact every Sabbath, but there are a number of metrics that show that community is less adhesive, and the basic Adventist message is lost in a noisy world, and that's really what I hope to talk about today. Member engagement in the church, it has some sub-behaviors. We can measure cultural immersion in Adventism, how much time they invest in their congregation or church activities, what their donations are, their support of Adventist education, and if they engage in personal evangelism. So cultural immersion is how how many of personal friends you have in the secular community versus in the Adventist community. And the weekly time investment is, I think, declining. I'm saying intuitively because people are busier. And but what pastors tell me is that the tithe and donations for many churches, congregations hit by the pandemic is holding steady, and I find that quite interesting. I haven't done much research to unpack it. There's a severe decline in support of Adventist education, and if we have time, we'll talk about that towards the end. And this concept of personal evangelism is a value that was promoted strongly 100 years ago. Here is an illustration, and sometimes the illustration conveys values. This was in the Atlantic Union Gleaner back in 1939, and this was kind of an expectation that lay people are getting out there and doing evangelism, and that appears to be very rare today. Evangelizing non-Adventist audience. The I think I talked about obituaries last time I was with this group, but the number of obituaries is declining, and I think that's a serious metric and factor in the loss of sense of community, but that's for another time. So why is expression, and I'll talk about expression versus communication, why is expression so important to the Adventist faith? You don't see Episcopals setting up a tent on the edge of town and holding tent meetings. That's not in the Episcopal Church, but our part of this is our view of God demanding perfection, that salvation is precarious, and correct belief is critical. Believing in not only keeping the correct Sabbath day, but keeping it well. And there are notions of unconfessed sins denying us access to heaven. Well, in the original Advent movement, these folk, all men, their view of the end was the investigative judgment and the soon apocalypse. And there were lots of signs of the end. And these combined for the strong Adventist sentiment that the world must be warned. People will be eternally lost if we don't tell them. It's our responsibility, and failing to do so is a sin. And that's been part of the traditional Adventist baggage. If you look at the apostolic model of church, it's more community, there's less formality. And when they started out, after the Apostle Paul was traveling around, they met in homes. There was no church property. And this is in somewhat in tension with the hierarchical corporate model of church, where church is a goal-seeking process. And for Adventism, goal-seeking is very important. Publishing, evangelism, education, healthcare, and the corporations. So Adventism is very centralized and policy-driven. The persistent themes in early Adventism was the importance of the correct Sabbath, signs of the end, the urgency in warning the world, a constant fear of losing salvation. And this came out in a lot of the grassroots obituaries. Striving for sinless perfection in diet, behavior, thought, and Sabbath keeping, and fear of not being acceptable in the judgment. And my goodness, there's some heart-rending sentences in some of the obituaries or some of the letters to the editor back in the 1850s, 1860s, and the notion that we are correct and all other religions are wrong, kind of a triumphalism. So popular Adventism contains two inconsistent doctrines. One is you're saved if you accept Jesus, but then it switches. You must obey the law perfectly to keep that salvation. And corporate Adventism is driven both by tradition and nostalgia, embracing now some archaic forms of expression. And these historic methods are particularly ineffective, which is my what I'm positing today, in a modern attention economy with its high volume of messages competing for our time and attention. So this is a doctrinal problem, and this is an expression problem. And I am suffering from a layout where I can't read the top sentence in my slide, but we in the attention economy and in the modern society, we're experiencing a growth in volume of data and information, cheaper to store, acquire, and transmit. And there's a growth in crafted content, easier to access, easier to find. So we have an overload of stimulus competing for our attention, or anybody's attention. And it's complicated by, I think, a societal shorter attention span. There's all kinds of indicators of that. A lack of critical thinking skills in the populace, and the human desire for entertainment. And this is fascinating. So I stumbled upon this concept of attention economics. Attention is focused mental engagement on a particular item of information. And human attention is a scarce commodity. It's a resource, and a person only has so much. And Americans, I think, have a limited attention span, and I think it's declining. And lazy minds want to be entertained. Boy, do I see this in students. And there's a decline in the cognitive discipline. So we also have a content-hungry economy where most people need to be entertained and some people cannot tolerate silence. And so I have friends who, when we're dining together, their smartphone is constantly pinging with an incoming news feed. And I know other people that have to have the music very loud while driving. This inability to tolerate silence is another phenomenon. But amusement as a portion of personal consumption expenditures in the United States has been rising steadily since 1960. And then it took how much people spend on amusement took a big hit there with the start of the pandemic. And that was mainly because of the shutting down of live entertainment activities. Well, just because you express something doesn't mean that someone in the audience will notice it, pay attention to it, understand it, take it seriously, remember it, or act upon that information in the way you wish to. And this is really a fundamental dilemma with the difference between expression and communication. I would say, looking around society, looking around the campus, 95% of expression fails to communicate. That may be too severe, but in many places, I think that's true. I've been using this model for a long time in my technical lectures for the data management community, that data starts with reality and facts about reality. So we have a quality and accuracy issue there. And we integrate those facts into information. And then we take that information and we express it in some way that we hope to communicate to create understanding in the mind of the audience. Now, in religion and in the arts, there's imagination that may have nothing to do with reality, that creates stories and ideas that get expressed, and then after expression, communication and understanding. So this human creativity includes an intent and purpose, and we will talk about unpacking the purpose of expression. There's a message. It is in the context of language, culture, and assumptions and values. Okay, so why do people express? Either the creativity urge, or to make money, or ego and fame. So and it was here in our marketing committee at the university about 15 years ago that Lisa Beardsley introduced us to the difference between process and outcomes. And this particularly applies to higher education. We have some processes we embrace, but are the outcomes successful? So as I watch people express, particularly teachers in the classroom, there are people who really know their stuff, and there are people who can express it well, and somewhere in the middle are people who can do both. And this applies to ministers and teachers. And I've sat in a classroom watching a very bright, very well-educated teacher not communicate with his students. Totally, he's talking to the wall behind them. And that's a sad situation. So the core beliefs of early Adventism was the imminent second coming, hence the world must be warned, the investigative judgment, so personal salvation suddenly becomes precarious, and souls will be lost if we don't warn them. So, what does this say about God? God won't save unbelievers? I don't know. The second major identifying doctrine for Adventism is the Seventh-day Sabbath and rigorous Sabbath keeping. And there were a lot of early Adventists who were totally convinced that some error in Sabbath keeping will keep them out of heaven. And that's sad. So, is correct Sabbath keeping a test of salvation and the judgment? Which I could talk about my first commercial flight on Sabbath and how scared I was that the guardian angels were not accompanying the wingtips of the DC-10. We have conflicting views of God in Adventism. Uh, a loving, caring, personal God, and this is where art is so influential in influencing or crafting our doctrine, or a God who demands loyalty and perfection before granting salvation. And this is an interesting painting because Jesus is the judge. You've got all the angels in the bleachers, and the sinner is standing unaccompanied in front of the judge. Very uncomfortable situation. I think these two views are in conflict, and I don't think they're compatible. And we've got to decide how we are going to depict God. And the book, The Great Controversy, is not always depicting a loving God. So if we look at the history of Adventist expression, it was initially lectures and publications, and we were very big and continue to be very big on publications. The Youth Instructor in 1852, The Signs of the Times. I could do a whole talk on just the style of this California-based journal that took a lot of risks and went way out on a limb on a lot of topics. When the GC was reorganized in 1901, the unions generated their own journals, Pacific Union Recorder starting in 1901. But the context in America included a lot of useful journals, Collier's, Saturday Evening Post, of course, the National Geographic, Newsweek, eventually Time Magazine. All these are competing for our attention. And then you have radio starting in 1925 and television broadcasts. So the Review and Herald isn't the only show in town. But this was the golden age of Adventist journals between 1890 and about 1925. And little competition and a very high ink to member ratio. And I'm not going to talk a lot about that today, but we were very good at churning out content and ink and journals. So back to expression. Early Adventism was a rural church. And if you look at the location of congregations in California in 1914, they tended to follow the evangelistic tenets. A friend of mine explained to me that who was in the ministry that back then you set up a tent outside of a rural town and everybody comes. So these farming towns and these mining towns in the Sierra foothills and the logging towns in Northern California all sprung up little congregations. And so evangelism once successful when you're the only show in town. For expression to be understandable, you have to speak the language of your audience. To be credible, you there's a reputation. I'm going to go through this real quick. But you have to be relevant to the interests and felt needs of your audience, and you have to be truthful. You have to maintain your credibility. So in the creator economy that we live in today, there's an explosion of creative content enabled by the internet and digital technology, sometimes without a defined audience or clear message, such as blogging. And here's a confession. Some of my friends in the academic community here in Southern California are writing books, which I am reluctant to take the time to read, yet I feel disloyal if I don't read their book. So that if in this creative economy, if it's not something we can use, it becomes noise. So there's 600 million public blogs, about 1.9 billion websites, 500 hours per minute uploaded onto YouTube. Facebook, about 3 billion users. So technology is no longer a barrier to entry for expression and communication. But what the web has done is enabled a flood of mediocre content and misinformation with little cost to the economy and infrastructure. I would love to see an economic analysis of what all the bandwidth in America is really costing, but a substantial distraction cost to society. So why do people express? For ego or bragging or revenue or promoting a product or service? And somewhere down there is religious messaging. Technology also enables anonymity of authorship with protecting sources against consequence and accountability. So when we look at forms of expression, I'm going to ask, what's the purpose? And that's what's the message, what's the audience, and what's the desired outcome? And expressors or expression creators can be in all of these genres. There can be an infinite number of messages, but the audience has a language and a culture and an attention span and symbols that you have to consider. And the desired outcome can be either to buy or donate or change your behavior, or even fear or feel good. And a lot of Christian expression is to help people feel good or encourage them to fear. So when we look at the spectrum of the purpose of expression, it can vary between entertain and inform. So at one extreme, you have Taylor Swift, and the other extreme, you have a boring lecture in a college lecture hall. I try to be somewhere in the middle. So when if I want people to invite me to speak again and pay my airfare, I've got to be both informing and entertaining. This is the last talk I gave in Denver. So in all of these forms of expression, you have to engage. And that is a challenge for some people. So here's a brief history of human expression, starting with cave paintings. And there are some of these in California. They're not well advertised because they want to protect them. But we could ask an anthropologist, what's the message? What's the audience? And is there a desired outcome in this form of expression? All over history, we see various kinds of expression. I'm going to go through these images pretty fast. There's didactic expression, that with structure that is very well developed, formulas and chemical formulas and things like that. There's spontaneous expression that doesn't have any well, it may have a purpose, but it's subliminal. And then there's specialized notation for artistic expression. And expression can be unconscious. I love this picture. This is on the Washington State Ferry in the San Juan Islands. I love the little girl on the right is so excited that both feet are off the ground. And I'll show some other examples. Expression certainly was limited or enhanced by technology. So when we had oil paintings, today we have film, cinema, and videotape, all kinds of enablers of expression. In Christian expression, we can have the nativity, which communicates good feelings, or the slaughter of the innocents, which is communicates horror. This is not a painting we would hang in on the wall of the kindergarten division in the church for several reasons. But expression is in our DNA, and that's a wonderful thing. Expression may be to say, look at me, I'm important, I'm rich, or expression. I don't understand a lot of forms of popular expression, particularly tattooing. I do not understand this, but people do it. So, okay. Uh, is there a purpose? Is there a message? Is there a desired outcome? Perhaps not, but that would take a sociologist. Some expression is rebellion. What's the message? What's the audience? The biotapestry was a wonderful combination of narrative and art, and we value it enormously. Poetry is a specialized form of expression, and it was very important to early Adventism. If you look at almost all of the early Adventist journals had poetry on the front page. I do not understand this. You might invite an English or literature professor to talk about that. But consistently, year after year, early Adventist journals had poetry. There's group expression that can be choreographed and not necessarily with a message, but certainly with a mood that they want to convey. I am interested in how many people wear T-shirts that have text on them, either promoting their and expressing their identity, either with a product or a geographic location or a university. And Christianity isn't exempt from this form of T-shirt expression. So this I kind of like this one. I saw that, or following the Coca-Cola type font, Jesus Christ, the real thing, or normal isn't coming back, but Jesus is. I like that. So Christianity has driven people to express, not always being effective. So again, I've got to ask, what's the message, what's the audience, and what's the desired outcome? Here's a Jehovah's Witness on a London street in Union Station in Los Angeles. When I walk through Union Station, there's a rack there with two Jehovah's Witnesses doing their duty to express. But how successful are they? And I'm too polite to ask them what the outcomes are of their expression. You drive along the freeway in Southern California, and there are these billboards that say prayer changes things. And I wish we could unpack the message there. What's the message? What's the audience? And what do you expect for an outcome? One of the more surprising billboards I saw southbound on US 395 up in the Owens Valley. This is pretty intense stuff. And behavior can be expression. The Tiananmen, I can't pronounce it, in Beijing, or a very severe form of expression in Vietnam years ago. Now, behavior and expression can be a ritual or a tradition, a diplomatic protocol, or an academic ceremony. Good storytelling is a wonderful form of expression, and we have a number, or we had a number of good storytellers in the Adventist culture. A good charismatic storyteller will capture the audience, will engage the audience. There was organized expression back in 1916. This is fascinating that these people are marching in such precise rows. This is very carefully orchestrated. This here is in front of the New York Public Library. How did they get all these people to do that? I don't understand. Today, we're not as well organized in our crowd expression. This is the March on Washington, and I have a whole set of very, very creative signs that were brought along for that. There's attention theft, noise, robocalls, spam. So there's the deliberate expression, and there's the unplanned expression. And this is one of my favorite Pulitzer Prize winning photographs taken up at Travis Air Force Base when some of the captives were released by North Vietnam. And a good photography captures and conveys intense emotion. And again, I'm going to call your attention to how many shoes are off the ground in this moment. This is a wonderful photograph. So, when expressing, you have to consider all these characteristics of the audience for the information. And this applies to selling a product or even creating a briefing for an executive. Attention span is a particular problem. So we go to the genre of academic posters, and I stand in the room and I watch the faculty coming by and looking at the poster, and how long are their eyes riveted to the poster? They're not reading all this stuff. Is this a good form of expression? I've got to wonder. And again, back to this issue of attention span. If you are emotionally absorbed in your message, you may be oblivious to your audience and their attention. So feedback is terribly important in any communication and expression process. And the mechanisms for feedback ideally is dialogue with the audience, which is why I live for the Q&A in these kinds of meetings. Letters to the editor have provided feedback. There's survey and sampling techniques and focus groups, but listening is terribly important. And I've got to ask, are Adventist evangelists good listeners? I don't know. And there's a tension between the arrogance and triumphalism of traditional Adventists and situational awareness or sensitivity to your audience. I have found that I cannot talk to a TV camera. I had to do a bunch of lectures here at the university on tape. I have to have a person. I grabbed a faculty member, sit here next to the camera, because I need to look at your face while I'm talking, which is why I am happy that Dan has left his camera on, but Lauren has not. And Bill Garber, you're lurking. In fact, Nancy LaCourt up at PUC says that people who don't turn on their camera are lurking, a pejorative term. So before modern technology, expression was rare and difficult, and people who expressed had to be motivated. So remember on the Waltons, John Boy for Christmas got a writing tablet, and this enabled him to express a very low-tech means of expression, but back then talent stood out. Effective expression must be easy to understand and memorable. One of the greatest print ads in American culture was this Volkswagen ad. Only 2 words in the copy. Everyone recognizes the product. what it does is reinforce consumer knowledge and awareness of the product. But this is beautifully designed. In keeping with that style, Crosswalk congregation here has all these video announcements, or actually, well, they're on a video screen all over the church, but they're 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 not videos; they're single frame announcements. And I think aesthetically, this is a brilliant design. Uh, by the way, it says something about a church that has baby dedications every third week. They're growing. But the simplicity of that, the design of that expression, I think is classic. So in American culture, we had newspapers, and then we got magazines, and then we got radio, and then television, and then cable television, increasing the number of channels, and finally web delivery of content. So what we're seeing is an exponential increase in the volume of content competing for our attention. Back in early Adventism, all you had were letters through the mail and newspapers and the denominational journals. So they commanded a lot more attention. I'm going to skip this. When I came home from first grade one day, my parents had bought a television, and there were 7 channels in the Los Angeles TV market. And the first show I ever saw was Howdy Doody. And what we're seeing now with cable is an explosion of scripted TV, now over 500 uh, different scripted TV shows, often through streaming. And so back when there were only 3 television networks in America, and we all watched Father Knows Best, there were fewer channels that resulted in a shared national vocabulary and worldview, not necessarily a shared accent on how we talk, but certainly a shared vocabulary. And that enabled expression to communicate clearly. Today, we have a proliferation and fragmentation of broadcast news media and many other forms of media. So when you have this fragmentation, you're also undermining the shared vocabulary of America. So and so many unscripted TV shows, the number growing. The Hollywood entertainment industry is still very prosperous. Then there's ambiguous expression. And here's an example, and I still don't understand what she was trying to say, but the text was basically, I don't really care, do you? Ambiguous expression subject to misinterpretation can be worse than silence. So when this football player took a knee during the national anthem, is he protesting racism, or does one person interpret that behavior as disrespecting the flag and the troops? That's as far as I'm going to go down that avenue. And so why do we express? Often we have a duty to express, or we have a serious, genuine intent to communicate, like a good storyteller. Forms of religious expression include the great classical art. This is depicting John the Baptist. Religious expression is very common, particularly in the South. This man thinks he's communicating somehow. Adventist tent meetings and evangelism is a very common and popular thing we do. Here is a person who thinks he's compelled to express by his faith, but is he credible in the way he's expressing? This is down in central Alabama, a billboard: go to church or the devil will get you. Here's another van. Vans are good for this, with putting scripture all over it. This is expression. It may be a way of expressing your identity, but what is the outcome? Even in Loma Linda, we see bumper stickers: the 7th day is the Sabbath, for God never changed it. What is this saying and this is I took this picture, stopped at a red light in Loma Linda. The seventh day is still God's Sabbath. Some people feel they need to say this, but how effective are they in expressing? Today, Adventism has a number of broadcast ministries, and they have their booths at APC here in Loma Linda. And the evil side of me wants to ask them, how are you different than the ministry in the other booth down the way? How is your message different? How is your audience different? Um, but I'm too nice to ask that question. So some religious expression may be more about affirming one's identity and worth than effectively communicating something important to someone else. And just a few weeks ago, I was in Florida driving around Sunday morning. There is no NPR station in Orlando, I discovered, but there sure are a lot of gospel stations. And again, what is their what are the outcomes of their gospel radio expression? So what you think words mean may not be how they are understood by the secular listener. So the bottom line is the genre and audiences have changed. There's micro fragmentation of content and audience with a shorter attention span, less available time. The types of media have changed, and today the volume far exceeds the capacity of the audience to absorb it. So again, the difference between process and outcomes. We got to understand that difference. I'm going to skip that slide. The traditional processes of Adventism, evangelism, literature, broadcasting, are they effective? So you have the General Conference leadership in a cognitive bubble where they tend to talk to each other and reinforce their ideas. And they're making assumptions about the secular audience, that Adventism is respected, our youth are loyal and embrace our tradition. That doesn't seem to be happening. The science about the age of the earth can be ignored. The Great Controversy, the book, is still relevant, credible, and will be embraced by non-Adventist readers. And our college teachers need to adhere to our traditions. A good executive isn't afraid to hear negative information. So we have all these different publications of the Great Controversy. Just Googling and all these different channels by which people can buy a copy of the Great Controversy. And there are lay groups that are undertaking to mail the Great Controversy to every doorstep, in this case, recently in northern Vermont. And there have got to be some farmhouses in northern Vermont that were a little warmer this Christmas or this winter because someone mailed them a book that they did not want to read. There is also a Great Controversy coloring book that was promoted a year ago. Pass them out at Halloween. I'm sure the children will understand what it's all about. So the Great Controversy is a book. People tell me it's highly speculated, particularly in the last day portions, portraying a sinister Catholic plot regarding the Sabbath. It's an example of 19th century Adventist eschatology that should be a historic relic. I won't tell you which pastor said that, but pastors tell me about getting phone calls and letters from the community asking them, why was this book sent to me? I'm not sure this has created goodwill. Is the papacy still a threat to Adventist believers? I got to wonder. There was an effort to mail the book to every doorstep in Portland, Oregon, and this may be the result in some places. Maybe, Lauren, I'm being too harsh, but so when we express, we are in a bubble, and we need to recognize the bubble, and we need to recognize the difference with the audience outside the bubble. And being in the bubble, we forget to use clarifying adjectives in our speech. We use insider terms and figures and symbols. So back to just because you express doesn't mean someone will notice it, pay attention, understand it, take it seriously, remember it, and act upon the information. So now to metrics. And before you manage anything, you must observe it, understand it. For reality and behavior beyond your visual horizon, you must have metrics. And this is an attempt to answer Lauren's question last week. Generally, metrics gathered by other people. So metrics must have clear definitions and be consistent over time and space. And I've taught this topic for a long time. In fact, I've done over 400 lectures in data management, data asset management, data quality, data visualization, all over the country and in London and in Australia. But when I was in the Army, I was up at Fort Detrick, and I had the opportunity for an apprenticeship. The Army set this up at the General Conference headquarters. And across the street from the Tacoma Park Church was some rental space where the office of the Statistical Secretary of the General Conference was based. And they did two major publications. One was the annual yearbook that listed all the institutions and the staff and the workers. And there was the annual statistical report, which I took very seriously. And I looked at that, and I've mined this for all kinds of insights as to what's going on. Denominational metrics change over time. We always measure baptisms and number of members and tithe and mission offerings. Today, we're also posting statistics on the number of companies, the average attendance. Now that's a shaky metric. And we're breaking down the additions to members and the loss of members in those more precise categories. And I think that's a good thing. We used to measure the number of Sabbath schools, and Sabbath school membership was separate from church membership. The tithe forwarded to other organizations from a congregation. And we even measured the seating capacity of church buildings, the young people's societies. We don't do that anymore, okay? And I've got to ask, how do you measure quality of the faith community? So looking at the annualized growth rate, like for the North Pacific Union Conference, we see quite a bit of volatility there. But in the last few years, it's been pretty low growth rate. How you calculate membership is fraught with imprecision, because you take the year start members, add the baptisms, the net transfers, the number of deaths that you know about, the apostate and missing that you know about, and what you end up with is year-end membership. And in many conferences, that's been declining. So in the Southern Union Conference, the growth rate is hovered around 4% per year, but now it's down to barely above zero. In the Pacific Union Conference, this is one of the most stable metrics we have in 10-year increments. It grew a little bit in 1970, and it's down steadily to where it's flat, near zero today. So, and a lot of congregations and conferences are purging their membership rolls of people that they no longer know. There are incentives to purge, and there are incentives not to purge. And Lauren can speak more to that. The other alarming trend is the decline in enrollment in North American colleges and universities. and it's dropped 23% over the last 11 years. And that's a whole hour-long topic. I think if we did root cause analysis, there's a higher cost of tuition, a decline of enrollment in feeder academies. There's a change in perception of quality and higher expectations on the part of students and parents. There's a societal hostility to higher education, and there's a shift in popular theology towards grades. This is interesting. This is unexpected. 100 years ago, if your child left Adventism, they were eternally lost. Less so today. So again, the membership decline and engagement decline have all these causes. And I don't have empirical data to back up a lot of these, but this is a qualitative analysis rather than a quantitative analysis. So what is necessary in Adventism is to understand, first of all, the impulse in the Adventist DNA to express, understand your own cultural isolation, get better at listening to your audience, look for better feedback mechanisms, and does your message make life better for your audience? That's another hour-long topic. On the audience, as you receive information, are you applying critical thinking skills? Is this content really useful to me? And does it square with the big picture? And what is the motives or needs of the expressor? So I have a whole bunch of questions for discussion. I guess the really difficult question is at the bottom. Would you invite your secular friends to come to church with you? And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to the host. I got it under 54 minutes.
Well, you did just fine, Michael. You could have gone on if you wanted. Clearly, you had plenty of content delivered at a rapid pace, and I think I suspect there's probably something for everyone to deal with. I know you asked for feedback, and I'm sure a lot of our members have something to say, a question to ask, or something prompted by your presentation that they'd like to make a comment on. I would like to know from many who are listening, was it effective? Did he reach you with this information? Did he touch you about things that were important to you? And I do know it appears that we are roughly the same age and geographic track, because I grew up in Southern California. I saw Howdy Doody and those three main channels out of LA. The other tag that got to me was your Bayo tapestry, because I'm looking across the room on my wall, and I have a little excerpt from that on my wall on kind of a linen thing, because I was fascinated by that when we visited that in Europe. Lots to be interested in, and I'm interested in, and I'm sure you know, I mean, it's not just the Adventist Church that's lost people. It's across the board, especially in Christian denominations in this country. I have a background in Presbyterian, Methodist, and some Lutheran, and I've always categorized the Adventist Church as a rigid denomination, a demanding denomination. I didn't see it necessarily as a negative, but it's not something I felt like I had to adhere to. Certainly, for my salvation, wasn't at risk. But I was surprised that the university system, the college system, is kind of fading a little bit, because I always thought it's such competitive to get into good higher education schools in the country that that would be a draw for families and students to get into college in the Adventist system. But even that's a stretch too. And the other thing, the delivery of information. And I know you probably have a comment specifically on where we're going with artificial intelligence and what's that's going to do. It seems like it will exacerbate all the possible negatives and maybe improve the positives that we've seen in these church growth things. What do you think, Michael?
I don't want to touch artificial intelligence. That's above my pay grade. It is a scary thing. I think the most important lesson for us to adopt right now is to be skeptical of anything that doesn't look right. It's kind of back to critical thinking skills. That's a scary thing. Of course, we're dealing with it in the university, and I get let's see, go back here. I about 4 or 5 years ago, I was reading a student paper, and I'm thinking this just doesn't smell right, and this is not the way a student writes. And so I took 9 consecutive words out of the middle of the text, and I pasted it into Google and with quotes around it, and I got several hits. The the odds of 9 consecutive words coming without attribution coming from another source would be very low. But boy, uh, I brought this to the attention of the program director, who brought it to the attention of the dean, and I'm out of the situation. But that student had plagiarized. Now it's going to be much worse. It's going to be much more difficult.
Yeah, I know the proliferation of information is staggering. Just for purposes of preparing for this seminar, I looked up the topic of decline in church membership across the nation in the different denominations, and it was page after page after page. And I looked at a couple of them and said, "This is too much."
So there's chatter out there about it.
Oh yeah, definitely. Lauren,
Okay,
why don't you go ahead with your question or comment?
Well, you gave us so much, Michael. It's astonishing. And
sorry.
No, it was really good, and you defined a lot of things for me that I'd been thinking about. I just want to throw out one idea that became clear to me a few years ago. I always wondered when I saw how we were doing evangelism, the sending out of unattractive brochures, the mailing out of the great controversy, this sort of thing. And so, I don't know, it must have been about 10 years ago. I was at a big national meeting, North American Division meeting, I should say, I'm sorry. And the director of evangelism for the North American Division got up and he said, now, this is how he put it. I'm just going to kind of lay it the way he put it and what it conveyed to me and what I began to realize at that point. He said, okay, so there's 300 million people in the United States. Let's suppose that we are capable of sending out magazines or books or brochures to 300,000 of them. That leaves, and this is how he put it, that leaves 270 million. No. Anyway, my math isn't right, but he subtracted that amount, who we have yet to reach. And then suddenly something occurred to me, what he was saying. He kind of went on in this vein with, subtracting the number of people that might be reached by our radio programs and everything, and leaving these left to reach before Jesus can come. And it suddenly occurred to me that what he was saying was, he wasn't trying to build up churches. He wasn't trying to build up the membership. He was positing that if we send out enough information, we have taken away the excuses of the people to whom we have sent information, and then Jesus can come. And that's why we had to cover we had to cover the field so that they no longer had excuses. And he was unapologetic about it. He in the entire presentation, he didn't once mention our churches are going to be larger. We're going to have more church members. Nothing like that. It was only getting the information out. And so if a brochure for a Revelation seminar lands in your mailbox, even if it's utter rubbish, and there's absolutely no compelling reason why you should read it, look at it, much less go to a meeting about it, your excuse has been taken away, and that is one person to whom of the every nation, kindred, tongue, and people that we don't have to worry about anymore.
Lauren, can I engage in some body language? If you can see, Jesus is coming. You've been warned.
Exactly. Precisely. That's what he, and what was so shocking to me, Michael, is that he was saying this in a whole North American division context, and nobody raised an eyebrow about it. It was just what it was.
Which gets you down to soteriology and salvation and the access to salvation, and that's in theology. And the grassroots theology in Adventism is still that salvation is precarious, and salvation is contingent upon good behavior and correct belief. And one incorrect doctrine could keep you out of heaven.
Yes.
And that is so prevalent in Adventism.
Chris Whitmer added here in a note something that I heard many times growing up. I don't think I ever said it as a pastor, but I heard it. That this idea that there are going to be people who come to you in the future and say, "Why didn't you tell me?
Yeah.
Why didn't you tell me?" It is your fault, and you're going to feel so bad that you didn't tell them.
Failing to warn them is your sin.
Exactly. Anyway, I just thought, Michael, that would help to explain the great controversy phenomenon. I can't for the life of me understand how wise people in Silver Spring aren't saying, this isn't going to work. This isn't going to do anything. It's just going to clutter up people's mailboxes and people's apartment lobbies.
And there may be more pushback.
They go, exactly. You're almost vaccinating people against the church. Why? This might help to explain it.
Very good. Patty, you're up. Go ahead with your comment and question.
Okay, yeah, I have a couple comments. First of all, no, I'm not buying the coloring book for my grandson. Okay, his parents though might do that. I don't know. I wouldn't put it past them, but I will not personally bring that to him. Another comment is that this weekend, well, actually, this whole week has been camp meeting for Georgia Cumberland Conference here at Collegedale. And because I needed to eat lunch prior to this meeting, I watched part of John Bradshaw's sermon today, and I got the first part of it. And he told a lengthy story about the fire in Hinckley, Minnesota in 1849, I think it was, where all these people lived with all this timber around them, and they had only provided so many barrels of water, and they thought they were protected from the conflagration. And he proceeded to tell stories about how women saw their children burst into flames, things like that. And, obviously the whole intent of his story is to say that, no, we're never ready. We're never ready. We got to get ready. We're never ready. And the emphasis was on being ready and the responsibility of every person to go out and tell other people to be ready. So I don't know if we're supposed to repeat that story to everybody we meet, scare them about forest fires or whatever, but that was how he led off his sermon. And another comment about that was when they panned out on the audience, there were a lot of empty seats. And I was surprised because camp meeting here in Tennessee is usually heavily attended and every seat has been filled, but not this time. And I don't know what that's attributable to. If it's more people just staying home and watching because it's more comfortable than trying to get out and beat the crowds and all that. Um, but I just wondered if you had a comment on, you were talking about the evangelizing and putting fear into people's hearts, and we've talked about that a lot here previously. Um, but this is, this is actually today. What happened? This is going on in our church.
Yeah. Um, and uh, we are under a unspoken assumption that salvation and evangelism is propositional
Mm,
rather than relational.
mhm,
And I continue to maintain that the best way to communicate to a person is through informal dialogue and eye contact, and over an extended period, with familiarity, and tuning in to their emotions as you share ideas. That doesn't happen in a tent meeting.
mhm.
That doesn't happen in broadcast. And that does not happen in publication.
It seems that some of those things, I was just going to say, in camp meetings, I'm sure there's statistics on the attendance on that, whether that's declined as well. But I haven't been to one in a number of years, but there is the opportunity to mingle and exchange ideas. It's not all information kind of thrown up at you in a non-responsive way. So, Linda, if you raise your hand in order to rescue a fellow moderator from embarrassingly having no respondents, I appreciate it. But I know you have something worthwhile to offer.
Oh, Dan, don't be silly, of course. But Michael, it's good to see you.
Yes.
We always have to fasten our seatbelts with your presentations because
Sorry.
Don't apologize for that. That keeps us all on our toes. I would just make one small comment separate and apart from my real question, and that is, this whole idea of evangelism, which just annoys me more than I can say, seems to just tacitly overlook what Jesus, I think, said to us, which was to be witnesses. And if you're a witness, you're talking about something with which you have personal experience. And so the billboarding thing and all the great controversy, and now I see we have Pentecost 2025 for the North American division coming up. To me, that's not witnessing. But in any case, that's just my private vendetta. The thing I wanted to ask you about, Michael and I were classmates, for those of you that might not know that, at La Sierra. And Michael, I am really concerned about the Adventist educational system. And I could be wrong about this, but I have heard that back in the early days, whenever that was, that unlike other secular universities or even some religious universities that built up endowment funds from donors so that they could support their institution into the future, that the Adventist church discouraged Adventist colleges in those days from doing that because they wanted to sort of keep a finger on the pulse, a finger on the control, and that the monies that would be needed would come from the church rather than explicitly from endowments. I think we see some donors that have built buildings and that sort of thing. But if that's true, or if some variation on that theme is true, what I also have been led to believe is that most of, Loma Linda University excluded, but most of our other Adventist universities are really kind of on a precipice. You've already pointed out that enrollments are declining. And, if indeed the idea that these churches, these schools were principally controlled by church elements. I think union presidents are typically chairs of the board of these various institutions. But it seems to me that they've all been allowed, irrespective of that control, to operate independently to the extent that there's no collaboration but among and between them, having to do with how various major lines of study are offered. They all are intending apparently to do the same thing, mostly in one way or another. There might be, Walla Walla has engineering, and and Andrews has theology school, although La Sierra does too. But I mean, is our church, is our denomination just going to sit while Rome burns, and our education institutions are just going to eventually fall apart? I mean, I had heard several years ago that Gordon Beats, whom you and I both went to school with at La Sierra, who was for many years, I think, the president of Southern Adventist University, was in charge of a group that was going to investigate these issues, but I haven't heard anything about it since then. So and that's, I'm talking about the higher level, forget the lower levels, the little K8, K10 schools that are probably just disappearing like snow in June. What are you seeing about this? What are you hearing? What do you think might happen? What's your prognostication here?
That's a 1-hour topic. That may be a 2-hour topic. And
give us the cliff notes.
This sounds arrogant, but I have slides for that.
I bet you do.
But because I've been wrestling with this for 8 years now, the demise of Adventist, or the decline of Adventist higher education. One partial cause is territorial. One partial cause is economic. A major problem is with the high cost of tuition and the Adventist demographics shifting to low-income minorities. They can't afford the tuition, whereas the state school is much more affordable. And then there's that theology. Like I said, the urgency of sending your kid to an Adventist school has diminished for many progressive Adventists. And I know a minister whose daughter went, I better not name the school. Well, I'll take a risk. She got her undergrad at Point Loma Nazarene. She got a full load PhD at Yale. And then she went to Harvard and got a law degree, and she's cleaning up. But and both of her parents were denominational workers. So there, and I attribute that to an understanding of the theology of grace, that it isn't a catastrophe if your kid leaves the church. If they become Presbyterian, that is okay with some parents, but 100 years ago that was unthinkable. So the market model of Adventist higher education needs to be examined, and those kinds of assumptions. Now, La Sierra has been very effective at marketing to the secular audience in the Inland Empire, and other more rural colleges do not have that advantage. That's a long question to a short long answer to a short question.
But the other thing is, I mean, even with it's such failure to have a vision, although what you just posited would suggest that the only reason to have an Adventist educational system is to keep our young people to be members of the church. And I would assert that that's a wrong motive on its face. But think about
but it's underneath the culture there. Yeah.
But think about what I think is a failure to have any kind of visionary thought. My granddaughter just graduated last weekend, praise God, from a very conservative right-wing Christian school, big one, down in South Florida, with huge resources. Oh my gosh, what this kid had access to for 4 years of high school. And it cost her parents close to 20 grand a year for her to go there. But you know what? We could have had the opportunity, our K-12 school system could have taken the opportunity to open up and recruit at moderate prices children whose parents wanted a private school alternative, and they could have been very solid financially at this point. But no, we're so exclusionary that thought apparently didn't even occur to anybody. My daughter did not have to be a member of this right-wing, religious denomination in order to attend this school. They just want to make sure that they want you to have a religious background, but past that, they just want you to be able to pay the bill.
Was this college or high school?
It's high school. She went 4 years of high school to this school.
Okay. Yeah, and you're on the edge of another topic that I feel needs to be researched. We are right now in a golden age of Adventist historical research with Michael Campbell and George Knight and Gil Valentine doing stuff that there's a much more data available. I would like to see an economic history of the Adventist Church, but that's a lot of work. But your comment about endowments is down. The answer can be found down in the grain of the financial statements, historic financial statements of the institutions. They're probably all there. They're probably in a file somewhere. They probably have not been digitized. Would that they were digitized, and 5 years from now we can stick an AI engine onto this data and tell it what we want, tell it what the lexicon it should use, and give us some metrics of trends of sentiments that we can't even measure right now. That's kind of what I did with the obituaries. Is I'm seeing stuff in these obituaries that offer a trend that most people don't see. So you're on the edge of some really big topics, but I can't address it totally today.
Well, I suspect the denomination would adhere to, in that regard, to one of my old rules of life, which is never ask questions you don't really want to know the answer to. Thanks,
Okay.
Michael.
Well, I feel I didn't answer your question.
Well, there you go. You communicate well, but maybe even Michael sometimes feels he hasn't made the grade. And now comes
She was
Dr.
asking
Angie.
me to dance.
Dr. Angie, please go.
I hope you can hear me. Thank you
Yes.
for an excellent presentation. I enjoyed very much. I have a couple comments. The first one, I thought it very interesting when you said that people have less attention spans these days and they have to be entertained all the time. Curiously, I'm a psychiatrist, and for the past 4 or 5 years, me and my colleagues have noticed a lot of people coming to us saying, I have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, I need to be medicated, I can't concentrate, I can't focus. And invariably we send them for testing. Some of them have it, some of them don't, but it has to be a real big spike on this disorder, which causes people not to pay attention, not to focus, very distractible. And of course, we medicate them with amphetamines like Ritalin. And there is a shortage of amphetamines in this country right now. Patients have trouble getting the medication. So I just thought it was interesting that you touched on that point. And that's just a comment. And it seems to be widespread now that people perceive that they have this attention, deficit, that they can't concentrate, pay attention, and therefore absorb the material, which ties into, people don't want to be sitting in a church and not be entertaining, or, not entertaining enough to be keeping their attention. My second comment is, as far as evangelism goes, I'm very, very surprised that the folks at Silver Springs and the General Conference, they are very concerned about sending out the great controversy, doing this, doing that, but they not seem to be concerned about the many channels that have been popped up pointing out the errors of the Adventist church. They don't seem to be concerned about this widespread propagation of errors in the Adventist church. And they don't seem to be concerned about sending, someone there to dialogue even with the folks who are running these channels. I follow at least 3 of them, if not more, regularly. There is Peter Dixon, SDA Q&A from Australia. There is Miles Christian answering Adventism right here in the United States. There is Defeating Adventism. There is so many of them. And if you listen to them, they interview people every week. In fact, Peter Dixon interviewed a former editor of Ministry magazine this past week. He does 2 interviews a week, one on a Tuesday, one on Wednesday. He brought this pastor who was the editor of Ministry magazine. He's still an Adventist. He's a retired pastor now. They had a wonderful dialogue. But this is an aside. Peter invited him. He came in. He didn't come in as an official of the church to defend Adventism, nothing like that. He came in as a guest. The discussion was wonderful, but it seemed like the corporate church or the leaders of the church are not concerned about doing any dialogue. I'm not saying confrontation, dialogue with these folks who are on, Facebook and YouTube every day, pointing the errors of the Adventist church. I guess they don't consider that evangelism. What are your thoughts about that?
I think when you're in a bubble, you ignore anything that contradicts your self-image of being correct. I had a cousin in Rhode Island who passed away, and in one of the letters she sent to me, she used the expression, "the doctrines that save us," and that suggests to me that her view of Adventist faith and theology was that it was so important to be correct. And so if you've invested your life in a church, in your career, particularly career in a church, and you're starting to discover that part of the doctrinal package isn't quite so reliable as you had thought, that's going to be upsetting, and people aren't going to they're not going to entertain that contradictory information, and they're going to retreat into their bubble. And I think that's I spent time at the GC, and I've spent some time at union and conference offices, and the insularity of the cultural bubble is intense. I even see it here on the campus. But so people aren't going to do things that are threatening to their identity and their self-esteem and their feelings about themselves. So I can understand why they're not going to look at that. That's a non-psychologist answering your question. Trying to answer.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Angie. For statistical data purposes, I just want to mention, I think we had a high a little earlier, maybe 132 or a little more, with multiple people on screens. I'm saying 140, maybe more, maybe a personal best on this kind of thing for you. Anyway, Ed, you're up. Go right ahead.
Thank you. This wasn't why I raised my hand, but I want to answer Linda's question. The answer is yes. We will allow things. She said, will we just allow Adventist schools to just die on the vine? And the answer is yes. I served on the task force that recommended the closure of Atlantic Union College in 2018. It had already closed once in 2011. At that time, it had 550 students when it closed. They opened it again in 2014 or so with 50 students, thought they could make it this time. And 3 years later, it closed. But even when it closed, There was intense opposition to doing so. And furthermore, in the last year, they have voted, well, somebody has voted to start it up again. And yes, rather than do something rational, the union conference will protect their power over the schools in every case. That is the core issue. Anyway, that's not why I raised my hand.
Well, let me ask you, since you were there in the middle of it, I'm sure a lot of alumni of AUC were involved in this. And
yeah.
I've got to wonder if nostalgia supersedes rationality.
Oh, I'm convinced it does, because to their credit, the union conference did at some point say to the alumni who were raising such political storms about this, well, we need this much money, you go raise it, and they never raised a dime. So take
Thank
what
you.
you will out of that. Yeah. I want to, Michael, I want to talk about what I saw as and probably everybody has their own perspective on this. What I saw as the core issue for Adventism, and you showed it on 2 or 3 slides, and that was the dynamics around the church of coming out of 1844 and the early Adventist dynamics, which focused on Jesus is coming soon, we got to get ready, the internal investigative judgments going on. You might be lost if you don't believe the right things. The Sabbath is pivotal. All those things. I'm just beginning to wonder, as long as we see ourselves holding the things of the 19th century as important still at the top of the heap in the 21st century, if our demise is not inevitable, we can't move on. We're probably afraid to move on. For one thing, moving on would mean that it might invalidate some things Ellen White said, and that can't happen. And in this day and age, I'm wondering, since we live in such a different society, if messages around that whole 19th century dynamic have any effect at all in this world, at least in the United States or in the North American division. And I don't see that changing. I don't see that the bureaucracy of the church could let it change. For one reason, if they did, the conservatives would make their life miserable. So what's the prognosis if we don't have some shift in emphasis to something that's more relevant to society in our day and age? Because the whole soon notion has kind of blown up.
Well, there are saints in the church who interpret every untoward event, such as September 11 and the Gaza war, as a sign of the end. It can't be long now. That's part of the worldview. I don't want to overuse the word paradigm, but that's part of the worldview. Another issue is that modern Adventism is terribly dependent on an inerrant view of everything that Ellen White wrote, and that's not practical. But that is a fundamental assumption, particularly at the General Conference. And I think there's been enough scholarship now so that you can't hold on to that verbal inerrancy very well. But you're asking a threatening question to all of us, in a sense.
I know that.
Yeah, and I I'm not sure how far I want to go down that road in prognosticating, if that's a verb, what the future will hold for Adventism. I think the institutional church will continue to survive, but it'll fade in North America, which is ironic because its roots were in New England and then upper New York State and then Michigan. Lauren, you unmuted.
Very good. Adam, hang on. I know you waited. We'll come back to you and then Chris and Emmanuel, but Lauren has one of his famous poll questions coming up. Go ahead, Lauren.
Let me just apologize to you first. We've had not too good luck with these polls. At times they like pop up and then they disappear, and we don't know why they disappear so fast. But hope springs eternal. I'm going to try it again. And what I did was I took Michael's 8 questions for discussion, and I made them into a poll, and this should be fun. So if it works, I'm going to click it, and I'm just not going to touch another thing, and maybe it will last long enough. I don't know what happens if you're on a mobile device. I know what happens if you're on a computer, but on a mobile device, we'll see what happens. I'm going to launch it right now, and we're going to see what happens. But I believe, Michael and Dan, that you can go ahead and keep talking. I don't think that has anything to do with it. Okay, go ahead.
All right, folks can answer those questions. We'll see if they'll actually total up. But Adam, welcome. You can unmute and give us your comment or question. Where are you calling from, by the way?
Hi, everybody. I'm from Dublin in Republic of Ireland.
Welcome.
So it's lovely to be here with you today. In fact, I was sitting out in the sun. I know many of you seem to be from California, but I was sitting out in the 18-degree sun here thinking it was really, really warm. And should I join the seminar? But I've really been blessed by the seminar, Michael. Thank you. And it's kind of really exploded my mind. And so thank you for that. I really feel it's been worthwhile. For me, one of the things I've struggled with as a local church pastor and working in administration and things is I've always see that our evangelistic methods and giving out the books like we like to do often, even here in Ireland, is very ineffective. And I've always tried to see this difference between why is our communication ineffective versus what can we do to make our communication effective, right? And I love this word. For me, this is mind-blowing in some ways. You've used this word expression versus communication. We express ourselves, we express however we are expressing our Adventism, we're expressing our Christianity, but that's not moving from expression to communication. And I think the way we've expressed ourselves has changed. And we think we're communicating more effectively, right? So when websites came along and I was involved with using a website in the late 90s kind of thing. And when we did these, we moved on from campaigns and then we created, we have channels on TV. And so our expressions have changed, but it seems as if our effectiveness of our communication hasn't changed, right? So while our expressions have changed, we think we're keeping up with the times, but we're actually not. We're just keeping up with the times in the method rather than the effectiveness of our communication. And so I guess my question to you, and there may not be an answer, is how can we move then from expression to more effective communication?
Well, I'm glad that you saw value in in my model of differentiating between expression and communication. There is spontaneous expression, and I showed examples of that. There is expression that affirms our identity. And I think much of what we see in Adventism is really to affirm our identity, make us feel better about ourselves. And what I was tempted this morning to include some photographs of some motorcycle club, Adventist motorcycle club members that have a vest that has all kinds of icons on it, but it basically tells the world that they are Seventh-day Adventists, and some of the Adventist cliches and stuff on the vest. And I only thought about doing that about 3 hours ago, and I didn't have time to include the photograph. But I suspect they aren't trying to communicate or anything effectively. That vest is their statement of identity, and it is really a reflexive thing for themselves. That's what I suspect. But I'm trying to find your. Oh, there you are. And so expression for affirming identity may be underneath a lot of what we're seeing. You agree? Thank you. And I love your accent, Adam.
Thanks for joining, Adam. It's a pleasure to have you here. Chris Widmer, I don't know if Lauren wants to jump in with some poll results, but let's go to Chris. Go ahead.
I think the church knows. They've surveyed. I think the administration levels of the church know why people are leaving the church or not attending the church or not giving to the church or not sending their kids to Adventist school or what have you. But they just do nothing about it year after year after year. The comment I had, and I did some reading this week on religious trauma, and I found the term adverse religious experiences. And I think the church is in denial over the adverse religious experiences that congregations sometimes give their pastors, speaking as a former pastor, and what congregations sometimes give to other members. And I think that's not worded great in a question, but I think along with many other churches, there's a lot of religious trauma in the Adventist church that manifests itself in a lackadaisical attitude. And I did see kind of the poll results, and many of them were in line with the way I responded. So that's about all I had to say today. Got a sore throat late yesterday, so I'll yield back my time.
Very good. Next up, Emmanuel, please go ahead, unmute and give us your comment or question. Still muted.
Sorry.
There we go.
Good afternoon, everyone. I really enjoy your presentation, and I have two questions for you. As far as the church is concerned, as far as higher education is concerned, not long ago, the president of the General Conference, he said he's going to put some kind of chaperone over the higher education to make sure to know what they are teaching. As far as the church is concerned, I wonder where we are going, because listening to your presentation, it seems that we have to think outside the box. But when we want to give 1 billion copy of the Great Controversy, almost 150 years old book, I think that the book from Lee Strobel, The Case for Christ, will be more relevant than the Great Controversy. So I don't see the church willingness to change. What do you think?
Well, I think I've explained before, but when you are invested your whole career in a particular doctrine and a particular institution, an institution with doctrines, with sacred processes that should not be challenged, you're not going to entertain change. Change can be difficult, especially in this embedded paradigm. So I don't see a change taking place. There are pockets of change. The Pacific Union Conference, and I think the Columbia Union Conference enthusiastically ordain women, but that is considered rogue behavior from the halls of the General Conference. Not rogue, rebellious. Rebellious, open rebellion. And at the same time, isn't it ironic that fewer and fewer young men wish to go into the ministry, and a lot of them that are taking theology don't want to go into parish pastoring. They want to go into chaplaincy. So here is this abundance of women, very capable, very empathetic, very well-educated women that would like to go into the ministry. What a dilemma. Does that answer your question? Okay, thank you.
Let me go back to Lauren to find out where we stand on our.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that out of 115 participants, only 41 filled out the poll. I want to make sure. Did you can write in the chat? Did you have any trouble getting to the poll? Because my wife, who's on a mobile device, says if you click on the three little dots that say more, that you can get to the poll that way. And I want to make sure that everybody gets a chance, and then we'll have one more question, and then I'll give you the results. It's really pretty interesting. All right, go ahead.
Very good. Clarence, okay, you're unmuted. Go right ahead.
Yes, good evening, everybody. Thanks for the presentation, Doctor. Very informative and very, very deep. Thank you very much. Brothers and sisters, I think we are all aware that when all is said and done, Adventism will flounder. It will go under. I am convinced of that, and I get more convinced every day. To me, the reasoning is simple enough. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's my simple reasoning. There are just too many areas of conflict, too many areas of conflict. When in an institution, the major doctrines are all in the majority conflictual, you cannot have progress. You will have conflicts and unending, and it just won't work. Another point that I find very disturbing to me is that Adventism, our church, has not been able to reconcile itself to scientific knowledge, progressing scientific knowledge. That to me is crucial. Any organization that tries to deny the growth of human knowledge will flounder. The world will go on its course and we will be left behind. That's as simple as that. Because when all is said and done, no educated person will accept any teaching from a non-educated ignoramus. If they consider you to be non-educated ignoramus, they will just look at you, they'll smile, they'll shove, how you say, haussez les épaules in French, and they'll pass on. They'll leave you there. And the church just doesn't want to open its eyes to present scientific knowledge. That will cause the demise of our church. One third point, we have refused over the years to recognize the non-binding, optional, personal decision stance of Sabbath keeping. Romans chapter 14 is very clear on that. He who wants to observe the day, wonderful. Now, I love the Sabbath. I enjoy it. I rest real well. But the text says, he who doesn't want to keep it, that's okay. It's up to him. Why don't we recognize that? We are not Jews, we are Christians. So, and as Christians, let us accept a Christian understanding of Sabbath observance. If we don't do that, we will go under, because the people who are listening to us, they also read the Bible. There was a time when people didn't know the Bible, and we had all the texts in our pockets. We came out with a proof text, and that worked. But that is no longer the case. Except we change, we will go under. That's my take.
Michael, you don't hear the word ignoramus often enough.
Yes. No one accepts to change anything, because the person presenting it is considered ignorant. Once you consider that person to be ignorant, you will block him off.
Very good. David Johnson. David, let me ask you to unmute, and I will just give Lauren the chance to jump in whenever he needs to with something about the poll here.
Yeah, I can do that right now. Let me interrupt and tell you about the poll. It turns out that most of us grew up in an Adventist home, 83%. Only 41 of you got to take it, and I apologize. I've got to contact. It seems to cut off the poll after a certain amount of time, and I apologize to those of you who tried and get on and didn't. There's some setting that I need to change to make that work. But let me go through it quickly. Most of us grew up in an Adventist home. Are you conflicted about any SDA doctrine? Only 10% said not at all. Some or definitely were the other 90%. In fact, 68%, 70% said they were, yes, definitely conflicted about Adventist doctrine. Do you worry about the fate of non-SDAs? Not really was 50%. Don't be silly was 32%. Only 12% said they were worried about the fate of non-SDA souls. So, Michael, these are your questions here. Are your children interested or uninterested in your faith? Uninterested was 36%, interested was 16%, and somewhere in the middle was 48%. So if you combine somewhere in the middle and interested, you come out above the middle, but not by much. 36% are uninterested. How immersed are you in the SDA church? Uninterested or even a little hostile were 3% only. Not immersed was 30%. Interested, but not as much as I was 20%. Somewhat immersed was 33%, and very immersed is 10%. And I'd have to say, I didn't get to fill out the form because I was watching it for everybody else, but I'd have to say, it's very hard for me to say that I wouldn't be very immersed in the church, even though I don't attend. I attend this class rather than a local congregation now.
I'm happy with a 41 sample size.
Oh, good. How many non-SDA friends do you have? Mostly non-SDA friends was only 17%, Michael. A few Adventist friends compared to non-SDA was 13%. 23% said about an equal number. 40%, by far the largest here, is more Adventist friends, but some who aren't. And mostly Adventist friends would be 70%. I got to say, Michael, when somebody makes friends with me on Facebook, asks me to be friends on Facebook, if there are more than 4 people that we have in common, I know they're Adventist, because all my friends are Adventists. I really, as a lifetime Seventh Adventist pastor,
Yep,
it's hard for me
Uh,
to make. It was hard for me to even make friends who aren't Adventists.
as long as you're aware of that.
Oh, I'm very much aware of it. What do you volunteer,
Good.
if anything, to your non-SDA friends about your church? What would you tell them if they asked? One person said, I try to be candid, but not too negative. Another said, not very much unless it comes up naturally in conversation. We don't discuss faith. Another person said, nothing at the moment. Somebody wrote here, they tell me that the Adventist Church is anti-LGBTQ. And yeah, that's, even my generation, and certainly those younger than me, just don't have the problem with LGBTQ people that my parents would have had. Somebody said, nada, nothing. I would be very careful. Another person says, I changed the subject. This is it. Here's an interesting one, Michael. You like this. I realized I was referring to Seventh Adventists as they. It made me realize I was counting myself as one of them, even though I was attending an Adventist church at the time.
The use of the pronoun is very telling.
It is telling. Another person said, nothing. I just tell them I'm Christian. I stay away from the topic. Nothing. I'm no longer in the church, so it's not an issue. So that was interesting. That was the only question I had where you had to actually write something. Would you invite your non-SDA friends to church with you? This was only a single choice. You could choose one or the other. 48% said never. 36% said probably not. Only 16% said maybe, and not one person said yes, absolutely. There you go, folks.
Telling.
That's very interesting. Very interesting. Thank you guys all for taking it. And before I try this again, I am going to talk to the technical support at Zoom, because we're paid at a fairly large, a fairly high level. We're not just using this, we're paid up. I need to find out why some of you got cut off, and I apologize that you were. We're going to try this again sometime. It's fun to do. Thank you. Go ahead, Dan.
Okay. Thanks for waiting, David. You're up with your comment or question.
Okay. Would anyone like to hear from someone who was raised in an Adventist church, went to Andrews and Loma Linda, but left the church some 25 years ago? This is an Adventist forum. I don't consider myself an Adventist, so I shouldn't take much time, if any, if anyone is not in.
You're fine, David. Go for it.
Okay.
We're very open forum.
Let me tell you my story. Was raised in an Adventist home, went to public school, grade school, and high school. My dad wanted bed check at home. Then I went out to Andrews University, was a good Adventist boy there. Went to Loma Linda, graduated from medical school in 1980. Graduated from, or finished my residency in radiology in 84. But while I was there, I remember going to an APC convention where one of the presentations was a presentation on where all the graduates of Loma Linda had ever gone, where they were practicing currently. And ever since 1910, whenever the first class was graduated, till then, around 1980, 90% of Loma Linda graduates were practicing currently in California, Oregon, and Washington. And the other 10% had gone to the rest of the United States, to Canada, to the rest of the world, or had died. And I said, that's not right. This is a medical missionary event or endeavor. I should at least make an effort to go somewhere else but the West Coast. So I did a fellowship in neuroradiology at Tufts New England Medical Center. And I decided I was going to be one of the few doctors who went somewhere else. And perhaps my efforts, my tithe, whatever, would help grow a church. After 2 years in Boston, I then decided to locate at the University of Pittsburgh and did academic radiology there for 13 years. And joined the Shadyside Seventh-day Adventist Church. And after about 6 years of suffering under the toxic faith of the older pastor, who was then relocated for a younger pastor to come in, and then another 5 or 6 years of his benign neglect, I just got wore out. What I realized was that the Adventist church outside of its large institutions is a very, very different animal than it is where there are large, what would we call them, ghettos, like Loma Linda and any of the conference offices, Silver Spring, Walla Walla. But if you're in a very small community and you have a small church, it's a different experience for those Adventists there. And that's what my experience was in Pittsburgh. In fact, Pittsburgh had the distinction of having the fewest Adventists per capita of any major metropolitan area in the United States. And the conference office decided they were going to try to change that. And we brought in another pastor. The older pastor left rather upset because he knew what the call meant. He was being replaced. It wasn't really a spiritual call thing to somewhere else. And we thought things would grow then. They really didn't. Much of the sermons the younger pastor gave were really kind of to his kids from the pulpit. If you follow God in all of his ways, he'll help you find a helpmate, that sort of message. So I would call it sort of a spiritual neglect for those of us who are older. So I just got worn out and then just stopped going. In fact, one of my classmates, or one of my good friends who was also a member of the church, came to me one day and he said, I have a confession to make. Now, he was married. They did not have children. He was one of the announcers for WQED in Pittsburgh. And it sounded rather serious. And I'm thinking, what could he be wanting to tell me? And he said, I was thinking he was going to tell me he was gay. And this was some sort of revelation, But instead he said, Sharon and I are now going to the Episcopal Church on Sundays. And he had been going to the Adventist Church on Saturdays. And I was shocked, probably more so than if he had said he was gay. But Paul was a very, very thoughtful person. In fact, his father was the professor of New Testament history at Andrews University at the time. Maybe someone might know the name, Johnston. And so I started attending the Episcopal Church, which was a nice change, but it really ultimately didn't hold my interest in it. And I moved to Wisconsin to take a job there, but have been out of the church ever since and have not regretted the choice. I keep in touch because I'm subscribed to the Adventist Today and also the Review to sort of keep in touch with things. But I think the church, I agree with our last speaker, the church is not growing. It's also a phenomenon that's larger than the church. I think the Christian church in the United States is also not growing and getting smaller. This is a post-Christian era. This is bigger than the Adventist church, I think. Anyway, you can ask questions of me if you like.
Thanks for sharing, David. I think I don't know if you've participated in this seminar before, but I think you'll find sympathetic ears and colleagues here, and you're welcome to come back each week. We'd happy to have you.
Well, thank
Lynn,
you.
Lynn, you're up, and I understand you're willing to give us a closing blessing for the formal part of our program. So go right ahead.
Sure. Let's pray. Our Father in heaven, we ask that you be with each and every one of this group, this fellowship. Give us the wherewithal to proceed this coming week. Give us insights that we need to meet the opportunities you give us, and help us to be able to reflect more clearly the love that you have shown us. This we ask in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you. Then go ahead with your comment or question.
Yeah, well, I'd just like to speak out in behalf of my church. And when I say my church, I say the local church. I make a clear distinction between the organization and my congregation that I attend, because I've come, I think in the last 10, 15 years, to realize that spirituality is an exercise not just in my relationship with the divine, but also a community. And that community is not a corporate community. It is a local community. And I have more than one of those. I have a community in my family. I have a community clearly in my local church. I have a community at work. In my classes, I have a community of students. And I find that it's much more meaningful for me to conceive of my spirituality as something that continues throughout the week, and not just in a formal setting. Even this informal setting that we have here is more formal than often. The things that I really get blessed by are the conversations I have with my friends when I'm in those communities. And I will say this in contrast to some of the other remarks that have happened. My church is growing. My local church is growing. And I understand that is an exception in our conference, a big exception. We're one of the few that has not taken a big hit during COVID. We grew during COVID, and we continue to grow for some reason. I have ideas about that. But there, I don't think the demise of religion is necessarily a foregone conclusion. I think there must be something that keeps growing churches growing, and they have this dynamic, in my opinion, in the fellowship that they enjoy together. I don't believe anymore that it has to do with the doctrinal similarities that we share as much as the relationships that we do share. And maybe I'm a heretic there, but I look at in Matthew 25, and in that final exam, I don't see any doctrinal questions. I don't see anything about doctrine there. It's all, how did you treat your fellow men? And if that's good enough for God, why isn't it good enough for my spirituality, my spiritual community? And that's where I leave it. And I believe, speaking specifically to the comments that Clarence had about conflict, that kind of realization is necessary to avoid the inevitable conflicts that he talked about, because it allows us to be tolerant of different beliefs of other people. Now, there are limitations to that. I've had the opportunity in my church employ. I'm not employed by the church anymore, but during my church employ, I had the opportunity to grow up. I grew up in a Seventh-day Adventist environment and went through the Seventh-day Adventist school system. I went to a school in Europe and observed the differences over there. But then I was in Africa for about 20 years, and I noted that the growth there is also community oriented and very much sociological as well. There are politics involved in church hierarchy, just as there are here. But a lot of people go to church because it's a way to get ahead in life. But the culture itself is very community oriented in Africa. They are generally an oral tradition, and they like to talk with each other. They like to visit with each other, and they don't go home after the service. They stay together. And I think that's a big part of the secret of growth. I just wanted to say, my experience has been generally positive. I don't feel that I'm probably the General Conference would appreciate my type of religion, but I'm still there and I support my church, and I'm happy to go to church when I can.
Michael, do you have a response for that before we start to close the proceedings down?
I am guilty of expressing opinions in so many fields that I'm totally unqualified to express them. But I get away with it because I think I have really good slides. But I've been giving thought to church as community, and for many congregations here in Southern California that I look in on, the bonds of community are so strong and have little to do with doctrine. And Wednesday morning, I spoke to a Rotary Club meeting, and here was very strong community, and the glue that holds it together is a sense of service to community.
Yeah.
And so the danger is, and we're on the edge of another 30-minute topic. The danger is that our identity is partially defined by who we are not. And if that barrier falls, that I can't tell any difference between my community and the Presbyterian church down the street, then we're in trouble. And so we have to redefine Adventism in positive ways, not that we hate Catholics, but in positive ways that can preserve the continuity of our identity. I don't know if that makes sense, but that is a challenge, and it's not going to happen if you cling to archaic doctrines.
No. Could I respond?
Go.
Yeah, I was also a theology major. I was contemporary with Lauren when we were at Walla Walla together, and he will remember one of the professors saying, perhaps he will remember, that we should have high standards for our leaders, very high standards for our leadership, no high standards for fellowship or church membership, but no standards for fellowship. And he said a couple other things as well that have carried with me, but that has influenced my understanding of fellowship. One of the signs that surprised me when I started attending this church is that after the church, nobody wanted to go home. They just wanted to visit with each other. And I'm not sure how that got started, but everybody seemed to have something that they wanted to catch up on. And I've never been in a church like that where some people aren't hurrying off. They just enjoy each other's company.
That is the most important element of community, is unstructured informal dialogue. Perhaps the most important room in building an Adventist church is the kitchen, and next to it, the fellowship hall, and maybe later a room where all the pews face in one direction.
Let me finish. I don't want my
Oh.
remarks to be construed as that theology doesn't matter. I think good theology does matter a lot. And it matters in how we treat people. It matters in how we associate with people, and it matters, clearly in our image of the God that we try to reflect. So but I'm not going to cast somebody out if they happen to disagree with my theology. We will talk about it, and it has to work in your life. Yeah. So to me, I guess the practical theology is really important, and I see that when people are happy with each other.
Okay.
Hang on. We'll probably close out with Linda, but I want to give Lauren a chance to give us the updates on upcoming activities, upcoming seminars, and any other comments he has.
Yeah, well, one of the lesser known teachers that I like a lot, I think she's one of my favorite teachers, is a young woman from Walla Walla named Jody Washburn. We don't know quite as much about her, I think, because she's young, which to me is great. I'm so excited that she loves the ATSS and she volunteered to teach. I think that's so cool. I love Jody. Jody's going to be talking about freedom as a responsibility, and she'll explore, this is next week, she'll explore the intersections of social science and theology about relational responsiveness, employing a critique of some common misunderstandings about freedom that are getting a lot of, that are kind of common in the world today. So Jody's going to be our teacher next week. She is a very articulate, very interesting person who really unpacks things in unusual ways, which I really like. We need young people who are unpacking things in unusual ways, because we tend to kind of go down the same path all the time. So I'm very excited about having Jody coming next week. So I will let Linda have the last word.
Well, Michael, I have something to share that might be edifying to you. The result of your presentation today has been that roughly 130, 140 of us, who I would hazard a guess, have absolutely zero influence on the thinking and deliberation in Silver Spring. I have been talking about things pursuant to your presentation that are big issues, big important issues for our church, things that have to do with its continuing ability to operate. So here we are with no influence talking about that. And in case you didn't know, I just received my latest issue of the Adventist Journey, which is put out by the North American Division. And the feature article, which is by Roy Gain, who's a big heavy hitter in the church and has some influence. The article is explanatory about the question of whether or not women should be permitted to speak from the pulpit while they're having their monthly menstrual periods.
Oh, that's important.
You can't make this up. You can't make this up. So I just thought it would be of interest to you to know that. Lauren obviously hasn't seen it. It's a highly enlightened article. I just want you to know. And in fact, it points out that that if anybody is going to be ceremonially impure, it's the pastors, because they attend more funerals than anybody else. And if you get near a dead person, you're going to be ceremonially unclean too. So
is that in the article?
What's so sad about that is that Roy Gain is actually a very intelligent man, the kind of intelligence, truly, deeply, intensely thoughtful, who should know better. Right. And it makes me so disappointed to hear this kind of thing. What a sad case. And by the way, when you said that, I thought, wouldn't it be nice if we could have more interaction, Linda, with the people in the GC? I know a lot of those people. You know some of them. I know a lot of them. I mean, I've served on their committees. I've attended their committees. I've been there. Ted Wilson, this is true. I'm not exaggerating. Ted Wilson has said that he reads nothing but the spirit of prophecy in the Bible. People who are around him have told me that he won't even read the Adventist Review. He waits for somebody else to read it and complain to him about something if there's something there he doesn't like. Just so you know, this is when I invite people from the General Conference to come and speak at the Adventist Sabbath Seminar, I have been told that they have been prohibited to do so by their bosses. They are not allowed to do so. So I have been striking out whenever I invite them to come.
Well, Lauren, you should be, you're well served by your charitable attitude. I just found myself intrigued with the idea of enforcement, exactly how this is going to be enforced. I mean, do people like me who've had hysterectomies just need a letter from the doctor saying, I can't have those anymore, so it'd be all right for me and I don't need to be, you see where this is going.
Oh, yeah.
So,
yeah, no.
okay.
And the nonsense that is something that we see pop up not infrequently on the Adventist Today comment section is something about, but what if the female pastor is having her period while she's baptizing somebody?
It just gets worse and worse.
Are you saying that nobody you've baptized? Are you going to ask the person you baptized whether they're having their period? I mean, all of this is such absolute crazy nonsense. No wonder people are saying, I'm not interested in the Adventist church anymore. No wonder young people are saying, yeah, no, this is not interesting anymore. Hey, we're almost out of time. Michael, thank you so much. This was excellent. You did a great presentation and you stimulated a lot of interesting conversation. And I'm not going to give up. I'm going to call some of my friends at the GC and ask them, join us. We have 130, 140, 150, sometimes as many as our highest number seems to be when we have some of our European teachers come and teach. They really pull people in. And so wonderful. This is just great. Michael, I will have you back anytime you want to come. And goodbye, everybody. Have a happy remainder of your Sabbath, what's left of it.